can you explain what you meant by piety and kind of talk about how that has impacted the generations? And on top of that, how do we get that back?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is the problem and solution in my view. This is something that I touch on in the book in the introduction of the Bible, but this is going to be the main theme of the book I'm currently writing. That'll be released next year for TAN,
All right, on.
and it basically breaks down like this: there are four elements of culture. Culture is the cultus, which is the religious rite. It is the oral tradition, which explains what the religious rite is, or explains the morality from the rite itself. And then there are the elders, the office of elders, whether that's the parents or the public priesthood or what have you, the king. And then there is piety. Piety is what allows that whole system to be passed down to the next generation. Piety is a virtue defined by St. Thomas as giving to each one his due, giving to one's elders their due. So the fourth commandment is honor thy father and thy mother. So we have commandments 1, 2, 3 are all about God and the cultus of God and worshiping God. And then commandment 4 is the hinge, which allows the whole society to propagate itself through generations. If you don't have commandment number 4, you're just going to have, and you actually have this in the Holy Scriptures. You have this when God destroys the entire generation that came out of Egypt, and then that generation goes into the Promised Land, but then that generation does not actually pass it down to the third generation. And that's the key break that happens in the book of Judges in the very beginning, that there arose another generation that did not know the Lord.
Mm.
And that's because they failed to have, whatever happened there, they either failed to have piety to receive the tradition coming down to them, or their parents failed to teach it to them. And so this fourth element of culture is the crucial piece, because if you don't have the piety, then the entire culture just evaporates immediately out of one generation. So the whole point is to try to create this cultural momentum so that everyone is united in the cultus and what Christopher Dawson says, what is called the moral principle of society, which is the religious cultus, the religious rite, which forms this matrix of morality and mores. And that goes for everything. It goes not just for faith and morals, but it goes into little things like how do you dress, fashions, architecture, music, food, cuisine, dancing. All these other things are seemingly little things, but they're all tied to oral culture. You don't, there's not a book that you are passed down where you're taught as a man how to tie a tie. You're taught by your father. He tells you how to tie that tie. And tying the tie is a symbol that communicates to the rest of society who you are and what is expected of you. If you're wearing a tie, you are expected to act in a certain way, at least, more and more, more 50 years ago, but even today still, if you're wearing a suit and a tie, you're expected to act more properly than somebody who's, sagging his jeans or whatever. You wouldn't expect that person to act the same way. And so these are all things these are just oral customs which communicate morality and social mores and the way that we respect each other that gets passed down. So these four elements of culture, and piety is the crucial piece. My view is that when you create a society which is based on anti-piety, which is based on revolting against the prior generation, then you create something that I term anti-culture. And anti-culture is not actually real culture. It's because you have to have these four elements of culture. And I emphasize that you can have these four elements of culture in a non-Christian setting. Because this is a universal thing on the natural level. You have Islamic culture. They have a culture. They've got those four elements. Hindu culture, whatever. All these other cultures, they have these things because they have these four elements. But what we have in the Western history, from the secular revolutions in particular into the 19th century, you have the creation of anti-culture, where you have something where they start passing down revolution itself and revolution as a moral good, and revolution is basically anti-piety. And so you have this anti-culture that's getting passed down. And if you pass down the ideal of rebelling against your parents, if you teach that to the children, if you teach your children it's the ideal to rebel against your parents, what are they going to do?
Going to rebel against your parents.
They're going to rebel against you, and every successive generation, it starts picking up speed. And now in the 20th century, it's just a snowball now. So that every new generation, you see it because we laugh at each other about boomers and millennials and this, because the generations are completely fractured. I mean, people didn't used to think about, well, there's this generation, there's this. It used to be just, we're all one people. That's because they had culture. But now with anti-culture, it's just fragmented all the generations into all these separate mindsets. And what happens? Every new generation has a new form of music, a new form of dressing, a new form of fashion, a new form of lingo. Everything's new. Every new generation is just restarting everything. And then you have new morality, new philosophy, new art. Everything is just disintegrating every single generation. So this is, as I said, this is more something that I'll get into in my next book, but that then brings us to the solution, because the solution is to create true culture in your family so that you can pass this down to your sons and your daughters. They can receive that, and then they can pass it down to the third generation. And so creating that bond is the way that we conquer this anti-culture in the secular society, because that's what our fathers did before the Roman Empire was conquered by Christ. Before, in the early church, when our fathers were martyred left and right, they created a culture within their families that was against this hostile world. And that's what we need to do again.
Where do we start with gaining in education, not just a book smart education, but a spiritual education, that we can give that to our families? Where do we start with that?
Great question. I think it starts with understanding that knowledge puffeth up and charity edifieth, because as you're mentioning that I discuss in my book on the Holy Bible, I'm trying to bring the truths of the imitation of Christ to bear, because that book was written when there was a decline in scholasticism. There was St. Thomas a couple generations before imitation, and then it had degenerated into just this Occam nominalism and a bunch of useless academia, which was not really like St. Thomas was. And Thomas à Kempis comes to town and he starts writing against the folly of this learning and just endless quibbles instead of a virtuous life. So I think what you're saying is so important, because like we've talked about here, men can fall into these vices of curiosity. And so that's why you need to get your spiritual life in order, which is the foundation of all of your life personally, and then becomes also then the foundation of the family. A man's spiritual life is the foundation of the family. And that is essential. A man needs to protect himself. He needs to take care of himself spiritually. Like you said, you cannot give what you do not have. So you need to gain that. A pious practice of many men, many of our fathers, is arising earlier, raising yourself up earlier than your family, getting up earlier. Your family's asleep. You wake up first, and you start offering to God the sacrifice of praise. You offer to God reparations for your own sins and the sins of your wife and children. It's on you. It's on your head. You are going to be judged for your wife and children.
You heard it here, gentlemen.
You need to think about that. Think about the flames of hell and the desire to offer to God a good what they say in the Eastern Rite, a good defense before the dread judgment seat of Christ. And St. Paul says, we will all stand before the tribunal of Christ. And so God has made you responsible, man, of yourself, your wife, and your children. And you are responsible for them. So you will answer for your own soul and their souls. And so that's why we get up earlier than them, because it's our responsibility. And so getting I think that men respond very well to duty when they are really challenged to do their duty. And that's, I think, when a man has this very strong sense of duty, he is able to overcome difficulties to do his duty because he has a strong sense of that. And so understanding your duties as a man it's very important. You have a duty as a man to provide materially and spiritually for your family. So your wife doesn't have to go out and work because you don't make enough money. You got to get an extra job or two and work those jobs so your wife can be free to be a mother and your children can be free to have a mother. And those are your duties. And your duties to protect them as well, protect them from the demons, protect them from evil Marxist BLM rioters coming to town. And your duty is to protect them and to be the rock. Perhaps most importantly is to be that rock, both spiritually, emotionally, rationally. You have to be the rock for your wife. Your wife needs you to be the rock. Your wife is repelled when you melt in an effeminate mess. Your wife is repelled by that. She needs you to be the rock. So how do you do that? How do you do this? What we're trying to get at is getting your spiritual life in order. And it means overcoming your own effeminacy, which is effeminacy is different than femininity, different thing. Effeminacy is an attachment to pleasure, which causes us to be reluctant to suffer. So we want to fulfill our duties, but we're attached to this pleasure. And it may not, we've talked about sins of the flesh, but it could just be your phone or your social media or your emotions or your music or your movies or whatever, or your video games or your sports or whatever. You could just be emotionally attached to those things and then not want to do your duty. Just like, I mean, it was exactly what you just said. You're on the phone trying to win an argument. Your kids want to play on the trampoline. That's effeminacy right there, because you're attached to this thing. You're not willing to subordinate your own will to your duties, and that causes suffering. So you're unwilling to suffer because you're attached to the pleasure. That's effeminacy.
Yeah.
So it is all about getting yourself together, manning up. And I want to emphasize, too, the importance of man support, because men need man support from other men. There is a hierarchy in a family. The man is the head of the wife, and the wife over the children. And there's an inequality in the dependence of a man to his wife and his wife to the man, because the man is the one who has to be the rock. So the woman needs and wants her man to be the man. She does not want to mother him.
Oh man, that's a huge problem nowadays.
Yeah, she does not want to mother. That's repulsive to women. Yeah. They want a man. And now the man depends on his wife, especially for things regarding the children. She has far more sensitive and prudent judgment on many matters than he does, and he needs to rely on her for a lot of those things. But in terms of his own foundation, his rock, his insecurities, things that he deals with, in particular, he needs man support from other men to open up to particular things that may disrupt a family. You know, you need the man support to pour into other men so you can have that brotherhood. And that's what I'm trying to get at here is the importance of other men to support you so that you can then support your wife and children, and helping you take care of yourself, helping you take care of those things that it's really your responsibility to take care of. These are things that your wife should not have to deal with. Your wife should not have to deal with all your insecurities and your effeminacy or whatever. She does not have to deal with that. Don't put it on her. Put it on your brother, because your brother is going to challenge you to man up, and he's going to help you.
Because iron sharpens iron, right?
Exactly. So when you give that to your woman, she then kind of has an instinct to want to mother you. I mean, that's just what she does. She wants to do that, and she's kind of repulsed by that. She doesn't want to do that, you know. So that's why you give it to your brother, and your brother sharpens you. And then you can go back and be the man for your wife and children. And so I want to emphasize that, because when we challenge men, it's difficult. And we are, as men, we do need support for our own struggles. And there's a certain amount, there's a certain amount that we do give to our woman, obviously, but there is a certain amount that we need to give with other men, and we need to get that strengthening and that sharpening with other men that we can't really get from a woman, and we shouldn't have to get from a woman. We should need to get it from our brothers, so that we can really give to our woman and our children. Usually, this would happen between your father and you. That would be the normal brotherhood. But because of this generational destruction that we've been talking about, it's more often in our day more just sort of other peers, men, and that type of thing.